Good evening. Welcome to Talking With. I'm your host, Yale Cohn. We weren't planning to do a show this week. However, the events that occurred just a few days ago in Newton, Connecticut at the Sandy Hook School demanded that we do so. It has initiated conversation nationwide both about gun control, gun violence, and mental health issues. Joining us this evening to talk about this issue is Bob Patton. He's a very well-known political cartoonist here in town. You can find his work on his website, bobpatton.com. Joseph Dobrian, very talented author, someone else we've had on the show before. He just released a great book called Seldom Right, But Never Indict. You can find out his information on his website, josephdobrian.com. Last but not least, very dear friend of mine, also someone we had on the show before, one of the smartest people I know here in Iowa City. I am, of course, talking about Matthew Sowada. He is the host of the great political talk show, which you can listen to on KRUI Sundays at 4, called American Reason. Gentlemen, thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am not going to hasten an answer to what the solution is to things like this. I think we can all agree that this was a horrible tragedy that happened, and it's raised a lot of questions. And I've seen a number of solutions proffered from people, whether they're feasible or not. I don't know. You've all engaged in this. We've talked about this privately and certainly in the social media and stuff like that. This happened. What next? What do we do? What caused it? How can we stop it?
The question is, can we know what caused it, and can we stop it? I'm not sure that we really can. I think that this is something that maybe could be minimized, perhaps by greater attention to mental health issues and how to deal with people with severe mental illness. But then you have the question of how do you identify people who are likely to commit these awful crimes, and how do you stop them if they have not actually done anything criminal yet?
Well, I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of people just and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but a certain Pollyannish way saying that's it, have to ban guns, have to confiscate the guns that we have. That's certainly not feasible. There's nearly 300 million guns in this country. I think that would precipitate nothing short of a civil war, and that might or might not be the right response.
No one's talking about. I mean, I guess some people are, but no one's really talking about banning all guns. I mean, you hear that.
I've seen it. Yeah, no.
Yeah, but that's not in the realm of possibility at all.
No, but some control is more than mandated after what has happened here, even before what happened.
You would think so. I mean, so it's interesting. Do we even have the opportunity to have this discussion about gun control? Even already, we're dancing around talking about mental health issues. Everybody, which is fine, and that's my thesis at the end, is we should be dealing with this in a mental health issue way. But is it even feasible to have this conversation at this point? And in talking about that,
how do you mean feasible?
Or will certain segments of society allow us? When is it the appropriate time to have this conversation? The people on the pro-gun side of people will kind of rightly indicate that to discuss this issue now is discussing it at a height of a state of heightened emotional sensitivity. It reminds me a lot of. It reminded me of when Bernard Shaw asked Michael Dukakis, quote, "Governor, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?" Unquote. And he answered no. Okay, so here's the problem. You need to be emotionally honest with people. The answer to that question is, if you're asking me, yes. Not only that, I'll do the execution,
well, maybe,
and it'll be slow.
Maybe Dukakis didn't feel that way, and maybe
not.
If it had been I who had been asked that question, I would have said, maybe I would favor the death penalty for that fellow, but I'm the wrong person to ask.
Exactly.
I'm the husband of the murdered woman. At this moment, yes. I am temporarily insane.
Yes.
I am not the go-to guy to sentence this fellow.
Look. Let me just frame this a little bit. Joseph, when you ran for mayor of New York a number of years ago, you ran on a pro-gun position. So, I mean, your bona fides in that regard are reasonably well established. Bob, we've had discussions. I've seen you talk for considerably more stringent controls. I don't think anyone at this table, correct me if I'm wrong, really thinks it's feasible to ban all guns, or let alone to confiscate the ones that are out there. But it's my feeling that when incidents like this happen, as tragic as they are, there's such a statistical outlier in the number of gun murders in this country, both in the mass casualty element of it, as well as the demographic of it. 53% of gun murder victims in this country, young black males, and close to 50% of gun murder perpetrators in this country are also young black males. I mean, with 26 people getting shot in Connecticut, 26 people get shot in Chicago on a weekend. So I think the demographics are kind of what's spurring this conversation here on some level, and certainly we're sympathetic to children, and again, our hearts go out to them and their families. But why is there no hue and cry generally about gun violence? Why does it wait until things like this happen?
What I know is, I mean, because when something like this happens, it highlights the need for getting these weapons under control and putting controls on further manufacturing of them. We have 300 million guns, as you know, as you pointed out, 300 million guns in this country. Does that make us safe? And is anyone rationally suggesting that more guns is going to make us safer?
In the universe of solutions, that is the worst solution, I think, is everybody under the handgun. That is, I'm sorry, you're stupid if that's your idea. But to this discussion
Are people proposing that?
No, certainly not. I am very much in favor of gun ownership for people who want to own guns. However, I totally respect anybody's decision not to own a gun.
So when we're talking about reasonable gun control, I'm just curious what it is, either you think people have in mind or what you actually do have in mind, if that's what you're curious about.
Well, what I know are effective strategies that have worked. There's three parameters for what are called children in place. These are gun control laws that states have enacted called children in place, and they have three specific parameters. An outright ban on assault weapons, a requirement for trigger locks, and a requirement for safe storage for the gun in the house. In states where at least one of those three parameters are in place, the per capita rate of gun deaths is much lower than in states that have
the per
none of
capita
those.
rate of gun deaths is just incredibly low, right? So there are a total of, so there are about like 20,000 people killed by guns each year, and the majority of those are suicides.
Yeah, and if you're talking about trigger locks and if you're talking about safe storage, are you telling me that I've been threatened by a crazy man who has been saying that he's going to break into my house and kill me? Now, when he finally does break into my house and kill me, do I brandish a court order in front of his face while I go and unlock my cabinet and take off the trigger lock and load my gun all the time he is busy killing me? Or do I simply snatch my gun from my bedside table and shoot him?
Or there's also the possibility that that gun could just as easily be used against you.
That's your
That's a
responsibility.
risk I'm willing to take.
You can choose to and have that risk.
It's no good for me as a home protection weapon if I have to spend several minutes digging it out of storage when there is an immediate threat to my life.
Look, I did some research into this, and oddly, I've seen a lot of anger at the NRA, which I think is somewhat misplaced, because they're a lobbying group. They're not the ones who write the laws. If they are influencing, they're doing a better job of influencing the politicians than more gun control advocates, then the gun control advocates have to do a better job. So the NRA is just a lobbying group like there is for any number of other industries in this town. But it's interesting, they took down their Facebook page because it was going to blow up and be just full of vituperation from all kinds of folks. That's their certain right to do. But I looked into it, and Joseph, you mentioned about self-protection, whether it was you or perhaps a battered woman or these kind of things. It seems to me that a lot of folks have been, spewing from both sides facts, or rather opinions, devoid of facts. Like, well, no one ever really defends themselves.
Yes, I have the number written right here.
No one's ever stopped. You could tell us what the number is, but it seems to me what may be informing that, and I could certainly be wrong, is we don't hear about those things. Those do not become a national story. Occasionally they do. Like, for instance, I believe about 3-4 months ago in a southern state, it might have been Georgia, where a burglar broke into a house. There's a 12-year-old girl there on her phone with her mom. Her mom said, "Get the gun and shoot him." She shot him. That was a national story because it was a sympathetic character, 12-year-old girl, defending herself against a home invader. But on the large, we simply don't hear about those things. So I think
that's appropriate. Sorry, if really quickly, I think it's appropriate we don't hear about them.
What are the numbers?
Because there were justifiable homicides by civilians where they were found later to have been justified in ending somebody's life. 278.
But
why that's a microscopic
use
number.
of a gun.
It matters tremendously to those people who were
Not to mention that
saved,
people who are behaving within the law do not make news. They're not considered
exactly.
newsworthy.
Nor should they.
Right, but I mean, I think
story.
it's a false step to limit that just to homicides. I mean, someone comes into your house, breaking in, or your business, you brandish a gun, they leave. That's not a homicide, even a discharge of that weapon. So I mean, I think the rate at which guns
somewhere.
are, yeah, but the rate, I think the rate fundamentally at which guns can be and are used in defense of life or property is far greater than people may know or believe.
So maybe the thing to do is not to talk about, so guns are like a tool, right? And then some may say they're unlike a tool in other ways that they have only one function, which is ending human life. And I actually will grant people that. That is the function of a gun. But unless we're prepared to say that the presence and existence of a gun is in itself a danger, I think a more prudent strategy, rather than screaming at one another, and I just talk loud, I'm not screaming at you guys, I promise, is to maybe examine other countries who have successfully gotten their, their homicide rate, their gun death, gun violence rate, orders of magnitude lower than ours, or an order of magnitude lower than ours. Places like, now, so the 5 that I chose, not at randomly, but because they had good rates. Japan. So how do they deal with the idea of gun violence? Well, they're number 1. They're the safest country in the world when it comes to gun violence.
Gun ownership is virtually illegal in Japan. But look,
swords.
Consider Switzerland. Consider Switzerland, where practically every household owns a firearm. Their murder rate is about the same as Japan's.
Yeah, but the training that's necessary for you to own a gun in Switzerland, I mean,
that's what,
in the United States, to own a gun in the United States, it's far and away more difficult to own a car or get a driver's license than it is to get a gun.
I'd be happy to see more firearms training in the United States.
Bob raised an interesting point about training, but where does training, that training may address accidents, training may address, horrible mistakes, but how would training of that kind, which they have in Switzerland, address people who are intent to do ill, whether it's with a gun or a bar stool?
Well, but besides that, there are other nations that also have very, very excellent gun crime rates. Austria, Norway, Spain, which have similar ways of getting guns to us than us. I mean, there's some amount of registration, but not mandatory training. There are other nations that have used that.
Do they have, though? And again, I want to separate, because we do have a huge amount of gun murders in this country. But as I said, the percentage that are in tragedies like this are tiny. The vast majority, it's either domestic stuff or gang-related, drug-related. So I don't want to talk about just gun murders in general. I want to kind of keep it to this kind of tragedy. Do these other countries that you both mentioned, do they have instances like this of mass shootings?
Norway certainly did.
Yeah, they do.
They had the one.
Yeah.
How many have we had this year? We had the mass killing in
We're a much larger country with a much larger population.
And a lot more
That is
guns,
true, but the simple fact is, if you combine the populations of Great Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Switzerland, Sweden, Australia, and Denmark, you would have a population roughly equivalent to that of the United States of America.
Well, we're talking about
this year we've had
anyway.
last year we'd had 20,000 murders. They had fewer than 200 combined.
I'm curious to know the pathology, though, because when I'm an old man, and I remember when I was a kid, guns were just as available, if not more so, then than now. But you never heard of incidents like this. These are relatively new phenomena. These mass killings. They seem to have cropped up in the past 30 years or so, beginning with that teenage girl. I do not remember her name. The one who said Mondays are really a drag. You probably remember her. It's a fairly new thing.
Well, there was Charles Whitman in Austin. That was in '60.
That was right.
But
Charles
that was the very
Whitman,
first one, and then
that was an extreme anomaly back then. Where did this particular form of madness come from, and is there a way to identify it and stop it before it gets out of hand?
Well, that's a great question that segues, I think, into the mental health issue, because I don't know. I spoke to a very prominent local doctor here in town today, Erica Lauer. We talked, but she couldn't make it, unfortunately. She was ill. Doctor, feel better, heal thyself. But there's always been these pressing mental health issues. Have they risen commensurately with these tragic mass shootings of this kind, or has that level of mental illness stayed the same and now it's just manifest in this way? And is that a function of people choosing violence or availability of guns? You make the point that guns were just as available that long ago when you were younger. We didn't have this then. Did we have as many mentally ill people back then, and what were they doing that wasn't this?
Well, here's something to reflect on. I'm not saying this is the answer, but what does the America of 50 years ago, say, share in common with a Japanese society, Austrian society, Norwegian society? I would argue that one of the things is a strong sense of national identity, a sense of a community as a nation.
A sense of personal responsibility also.
Exactly. I mean, all these things are, Japan, I mean, they are personal responsibility. That is what that country is.
Are you positing then the American, embrace and love for individualism at all cost might be distancing people from a sense, not just of their communities, but a sense of like just how horrible these kind of things are.
Perhaps not individualism, but a sense of personal responsibility. We seem nowadays to be much more ready to say, it's not my fault, society's to blame, it's my upbringing that's to blame, something like
Violence
that.
in the media, etc.
Right, you can be as individualistic as you like, as long as you don't break another person's leg or pick another person's pocket. We seem to have gotten away from that understanding of individualism.
But one thing that is missing, that was missing 50 years ago, that's missing today, we didn't have 50 years ago the rapid fire weapons. There was no access to the kind of weaponry that could mow down 30 or 40 people in a matter of seconds 60 or 70 years ago, available to the general public
weapons are
as
still
there
illegal.
is today.
Automatic weapons are still illegal. We are talking sometimes about semi-automatic weapons, which do not fire until you squeeze the trigger. That is, you go bang, 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 bang. It's not blah, 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 blah.
I'm
like
glad you bring that up
automatic.
because I think a lot of people talk, and certainly there's I think a valid debate about the need of someone to have a Bushmaster or some of the other guns that were used in this, but people make the mistake of thinking that they are like in the movies where, you know, rapid fire. It's not. Whether it's a 6-shot pistol, a Glock, or a Bushmaster, they can only fire as quickly as you can pull your trigger. There may be, for instance, larger magazine capacities. The bullets may, the rounds themselves may be more damaging, but insofar as how many bullets can be fired in a certain length of time, that's strictly a question of, you know, how quick you are with the trigger.
Just to tease you a little, it does bother me. I always hear a lot in this country about what I need from other people. Other people telling me what I should need access to.
Well, you don't need to own a gun.
Hell, yeah, I don't need a lot of things. I don't need to eat, a Eggo waffle or something in the morning. But it's my choice of what I want to eat and what I want to own, unless you can prove to me with numbers that there are significant externalities, things that my owning something, effects that my owning something has on the world around me. If you can't prove those externalities, and they have to be big enough to justify telling me I can't do what I want to do, which I think that should be a high bar to reach. And these, automatic weapons, even semi-automatic weapons, handguns killed 6,000 people, shotguns killed 300. Of the 12,000 people, 8,775 people killed by guns. The huge majority of those, 75%, were killed by handguns.
Many of those were suicides.
Well, no. Well, you know what? I don't know how I did the math. I already accounted for suicides.
Let me throw this in out there.
Actually,
if it's not the kind of weapon, if it's not, the access to the weapon, what about numbers of weapons? Should there be a limit on how many of these, of any kind of guns somebody could own? Because I've heard people throw that out. I've even seen people discuss today, and I remember Chris Rock doing a brilliant comedy bit years ago about this. Don't worry about guns. Just make bullets cost $5,000 each.
Yep.
Is a limit to ammunition? I mean, where might there be practical middle ground solutions to some of these things? Bob, what do you think?
First of all, the accessibility. First of all, I dispute that the accessibility issue is not feasible. I mean, if it's easier for me, I could leave here tonight and go to a good store. I could go to Walmart, Kmart, Shields, whatever. All I'd have to do is fill out an application. In 3 days, I would have a gun.
Okay.
It would take me longer.
As a legal gun owner, though.
Yeah, but the law would recognize me as legal for the sole reasons that I have no felony convictions on my record, and no judge has ever declared me mentally incompetent. Now, by my own admission, yeah, I drink like a fish. I have pretty bad mood swings. I've seen a therapist more than a few times. I would be the first to say I'm not the kind of person who should be owning a gun.
Okay, I don't have the
so
numbers
the standards.
on this,
I would so totally respect your decision not to own a gun, but that doesn't give anybody else the right to say that I may not own a gun.
Yeah, and I do not own a gun, and this drives people insane when I say this on the radio, but it's true. If I walked around armed with a handgun, the world would be safer. Now, I don't think that's true of most people. But I know myself. I would let somebody go break into my house and steal my money. I would let them steal my property. That thing. I mean, if I, and again, I don't have a gun, but I think you have to think of what these weapons laws are written for. The bottom percent of intelligence and good judgment, right? But I think that I can't talk about. I don't know if the number is more than 50%, if it's more than 75%. But for me, if I had the ability to end a life in a snap second, and put it in a little box when I'm drinking or whatever, but walking around, the world would be safer.
Well, I certainly remember here in Iowa City when they changed the laws statewide for the issue of weapons carry permits from shall issue to may issue, that there was enormous concerns in the community, that people literally saying there'd be blood in the streets and shoot out the OK
I
Corral.
think they changed it from may
Yeah.
issue to shall issue.
Pardon me, yes, thank you for correcting me. And that didn't come to pass, and other places that have allowed that, and even Illinois. Chicago, which is where I grew up, has the strictest gun restrictions in the country. Is now, they've lost case after case.
Most
They're
people
gonna,
just don't feel the need to carry a firearm. I mean, I'm a gun owner, but I never go armed in public. I just have no reason to. Besides, it would spoil the drape of my suit.
Sure, but Bob, as you mentioned, absent you having a felony conviction or adjudication from the court saying he's mentally unstable, that's legal. But what percentage? What percentage of guns used in crimes are used by people who do have a legal right to them?
I think a lot.
Really?
Because
No.
a lot of
Adam
these
Lanza
guns-
had every right to.
yeah.
Am I pronouncing
Well,
his last name right? He had every
yeah.
right to.
No, those guns were
He was
his
the-
mother's. They weren't.
No, but
actually
even
his.
if they weren't, they're a huge proportion of these gun crimes. Again, anybody can look these statistics up. FBI uniform crime statistics. That's where I got all my information for today. A huge number of people who are killed with firearms are killed by acquaintances, right? And sometimes that's a silly thing where, somebody's a cab driver, and since there was an expectation of a business practice, and I don't remember who said this. I'm sorry, I'm not citing, but it's an example of, okay, that is also an acquaintance, but a lot of it's boyfriends, it's husbands, and it's 90% male, by the way, so I'm not using those terms mistakenly, but it is a lot of times people who, it's not just, I'm crazy, I might be heartbroken, or I might be abusive in the moment, but I think the registration thing saying only criminals use guns, that's not true. People that with the right to have guns use guns poorly all the time.
Okay, but you go ahead, Bob.
And it's the ease by which they can get their hands on the guns. That's what is the most disconcerting to me and to many Americans.
So
Just
how hard
easy.
should it be then?
First of all, it should be easier. Well, two things. First, it should be at least as difficult to get your hands on a driver's license than it is to get your hands on a gun. It would take me probably two and a half weeks to get it. If I didn't have one now, it would take me two and a half
Why,
weeks
'cause
to
of
get a
learning to
driver's
drive?
license.
Is that what you mean?
Do you not have
If
a
it was-
self-evident right to protect yourself and your family?
That's inherent in the Second Amendment.
You have a right
But
to
at the time
travel
to
too,
say-
but we
yeah.
license people.
But I mean, there are common sense. But there are common sense restrictions on each of the amendments to the Constitution. Yes, I do have a right to protect my family. But a couple of muskets over the fireplace—that's one thing. I mean, a weapon. A weapon that could, take out 30 or 40 people in a matter of seconds. That's
Well,
a
what are
completely
you
different
going to get
matter.
that's going to take down a Predator drone? We have with the Second Amendment. We need to defend ourselves from the government part of that's gone. Okay, there is no amount of arms that we as citizens could reasonably have. They can vaporize.
You'd be surprised
If
if
you have a
the
50 caliber sniper
governmental
rifle, take down
behavior
a-
became egregious enough. We just might have another revolution.
Well, here,
No,
We have a revolution every 4 years. We use ballot boxes and voting booths
that's
to
not
do
what
that.
they meant by the Tree of Liberty. That is not
choice
what they
between the
meant.
evil stupid candidate and the stupid evil candidate, that's hardly a revolution.
Look, in this country, for whatever reasons, it seems like we're not very good at regulating guns. You can argue whether they're regulated enough or entirely too much. We are, however, very good at locking people up.
Yeah.
So why then, because look, unlike cases where there's a serial killer, invariably, but not just in Hollywood movies, but in real life, and 50 bodies are discovered in somebody's basement, he was quiet, we never suspected a thing, he always mowed his lawn, almost without exception, both in this tragic case, as well as the shooting in Littleton, Colorado, Columbine, Virginia Tech, you name it, all these people were raising red flag after red flag after red flag, so when they finally snap and things like this happen, the general consensus is, boy, we saw this coming, this guy's been, batshit insane for ages now. Why aren't we preemptively, if not incarcerating those people, institutionalizing them,
Well,
taking them off the streets before they can harm themselves?
For
or
the
others?
simple reason that it's easier to, when a person, as you say, snaps, then they see themselves as having a choice. I can either get the mental health I need, or I can get a gun. Either one will solve my problems. Which one is easier to get? If it were easier
That's sort
to
of a
get,
false dichotomy, don't you think? I mean, there are plenty
Not
of
really.
other options that somebody might take. It's not a matter of, I'm going to go to a psychiatrist or I'm going to shoot up the school. No, I might try some other alternative cure, I might drink heavily, I might do any hundreds of other things besides shooting up.
So
people.
what
But he sees, but at the point where a person snaps, he doesn't look for a temporary fix. He looks for a permanent solution.
I can't believe we're having this conversation to the extent that we're having it. I mean, Yale's talking about the government preemptively getting
Absolutely, I'm
involved in locking
talking
people
about
up.
that. And I'm not
No,
suggesting...
you are responsible for your actions, not your thoughts, not your words.
but these people are doing actions.
If they can get you to agree, but there's no coercion or certainly not incarcerating somebody before they do something wrong.
I've been in this state to institutionalization hearings where people, by order of the court, were remanded to the custody of mental health care facilities.
It's not easily done, though, and I don't think it should be done simply because a guy plays too many video games and goes around muttering to himself.
Well, I think there's a very brilliant writer out of Los Angeles named Jason Roy, wrote a fantastic piece, which you can find on the website bitterlemons.com. He recounts his own father's suicide some years ago and how the lack of mental health care led to that. But very easily, if his father had not taken his own life by hanging, he wasn't a gun person, his father could have potentially been one of these people that took this tragic route.
That's awesome. Let's skip arm in arm to go spend some money on mental health care.
And the lack of health care there. But when I made the same point to him when we corresponded, he said, well, Yale, what if they decide that something I said or you said is just too scary and they're going to lock us up? I don't think the baseline would be that vague. I think in instances
You're talking about lowering it. That's what you're talking about.
Well, would you rather have people under dubious legal authority remanded to custody, and what would that number be versus the potentiality of either taking away the right of people to own the guns they already have, or even, as some have suggested, and I don't think it's feasible,
I never want
confiscating
locked up
guns.
so I feel safe.
Well, it seems to me that we've got two issues going on here. One, the mental health issue, and the other, the issue of gun ownership. Now, on the mental health issue, I would like to see the private sector step up to the plate and somebody organize some sort of a foundation for researching and treating this particular type of mental health. We can't count on the government to do it. First of all, they're not going to appropriate the money for it. Second of all, they're too dumb. We need smart people in the private sector to address this particular type of mental illness.
The only question is then there comes the question of affordability. So many people
know
that they need know that they need mental health care, know that they need help, know that they may be on the verge of snapping, but they just simply don't have the access to the funds. That's where both private and the public sector need to come into gear, need to make universal physical and mental health a priority.
That's where this idea that I've got of a strong sense of community as a nation, if we could do work on developing that, and then instead of every time, throwing this hand grenade of let's ban guns. Well, you can never ban a gun because then the next thing you know, the King of England will be kicking down my door. Every time you toss that rhetorical hand grenade, no one ever starts. Okay, let's actually think, reflect. A horrible thing happened because some nut went. I don't know if you could swear, but went crazy and did a horrible thing. You can't legislate away nuts, right? It needs a community supporting.
We can't legislate them away, but what can we do? Not just to get them the help they need and the treatment they need, and not just to keep them away from guns, which is something that's, I think, a long discussion, and however it might or might not be resolved. But how can we keep them from being in a position to? And if we're going in the emotional knee-jerk reaction, my first thought was like, well, gee whiz, let's get these people off the streets.
That's why I say the private sector ought to step up and provide more mental health care, perhaps on a charitable basis. Perhaps a research foundation could be set up by some very wealthy endower which could treat people at little or no cost in exchange for being able to use their
it costs between
research.
$26,000 and $32,000 a year to incarcerate somebody for a nonviolent crime like marijuana. Maybe we let those people out, and use that money to help people who are more troubled and are probably going to do more harm to society and their community than simply having a bag of weed.
Is that how it worked before? You said you remember when it didn't seem like this kind of thing happened. Were there private organizations that were chipping in? What was different?
I don't think that this particular brand of mental illness existed to the same extent that it does now. I think it's a recent development. You certainly
The illness didn't exist, or it didn't explode in this regard? people didn't take this
It was
choice.
not as evident. You
Sure.
didn't
I mean,
see
there's
people-
Albert Fish, but
Right, you didn't see people going crazy and shooting up a school, or for that matter, attacking school children with a sharp instrument. It was just extremely, extremely rare. And this specific manner of acting out seems to me
so our brains have
quite
changed.
recent.
Okay, listen, we have just under a minute left.
Okay, sorry.
A variety of perspectives expressed here and opinions. I appreciate that all very much. Certainly, this is going to be an ongoing discussion, but I think, like most things that have become politicized or fractional, how can people who share a variety of opinions? I think no one is in support of children being murdered. Everyone believes this is a horrible thing.
Straw
How
man
can
to make
we,
that kind of statement.
whatever the resolution is, how can we as a nation with a lot of different opinions have this conversation? People say now is the time to talk. How can we have this conversation in a
Well,
way
you can't do it
that's
on
not
Facebook because
no,
it becomes acrimonious.
of course.
You can't look the other person in the eye either.
So, I mean, how do we go about this? How do we have this conversation?
Let's do this
as a
again next
nation?
week.
Okay.
It'll catch on.
I'll have three Americans on for now for
Three at a
100
time.
million. Yeah, for 100 million episodes.
We talked about it nice. This was nice. We can talk.
well,
We all
I
had our
think
views.
Maybe that's the case then, for people to talk in person to amongst one another. But listen, I want to thank you all very much for your time to come out and discuss this with us. Very important issue. We'll welcome you back on the show to talk about this or any other issue. I would like to thank everybody at home for watching. Wish them a happy and healthy holiday season and new year, and we'll be back after the first of the year. We're going to take a few weeks off here at PTV to tend to ourselves and think about all the great shows we're going to make for you coming the first of the year. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next year.